Henry sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise from his cup of coffee. The morning was cold and quiet, and the house seemed almost as sleepy as his daughter Millie, who was still in her room. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It read 7:30 a.m. Soon, he would need to wake Millie to start the daily care routine. The house they lived in was small and cozy, filled with memories of happier times. Old photos decorated the walls, showing moments that seemed to belong to another life: a birthday, a trip to the beach, Henry's wedding to his late wife, Mary. Now, those moments were just distant echoes, and life had become a series of meticulous, almost automatic routines. Henry stood up carefully, feeling the weight of the years in his knees. He walked slowly down the hallway to Millie's room. The door was ajar, as he always left it, so he could hear if she needed anything during the night. He gently pushed the door open and entered. Millie was lying down, half awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. When Henry entered, she turned her head and gave him a sleepy smile. "Good morning, Dad," she said softly. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" Henry responded, approaching the bed and adjusting the blanket over her. "Yes, as always." "And you?" Also. I'll prepare your breakfast. How about toast with jam today?" Henry tried to sound cheerful, but there was a weariness in his voice that Millie knew all too well. "Toast with jam sounds great," Millie replied, trying to match his enthusiasm. Henry smiled, a half-hearted smile, and left the room. In the kitchen, he began preparing breakfast. As the toast browned in the toaster, he found himself thinking about how much his life had changed since Millie's accident. She had been only 10 years old when the car skidded on the wet road and crashed into a tree. The image of the ambulance taking Millie and Mary to the hospital was still etched in his mind, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. After the accident, everyone's lives changed irrevocably. Mary, his wife, who had been the emotional anchor of the family, dedicated herself entirely to caring for Millie. But a few years later, Mary was diagnosed with cancer, and before they could process the impact of the disease, she was gone, leaving Henry alone with the responsibility of caring for Millie. As he spread jam on the toast, Henry sighed. He loved Millie more than anything in this world, but he knew his life had become a shadow of what it once was. He clung to routine, the only thing that still gave him a sense of purpose. Every morning was the same: wake Millie, prepare breakfast, help her with daily activities, and so the day would pass slowly until night fell, bringing with it exhaustion and loneliness. When he finished preparing breakfast, Henry took the tray to Millie's room. She was already sitting up, with the pillow supporting her back. He placed the tray on her lap with a smile and sat on the edge of the bed. "It looks delicious, Dad." "Thank you," Millie said, starting to eat. As she ate, Henry watched his daughter in silence. He noticed every detail, every change in her expression, like a doctor examining a patient. Deep down, he knew his overprotectiveness stemmed from a deep fear of losing the only person who still gave his life meaning. Even though Millie had learned to live with her condition, he had never been able to fully accept it. The morning passed slowly, like all the others. After breakfast, Henry helped Millie transfer to her wheelchair and took her to the living room. He put on some soft music, something Millie always liked to listen to while she read or watched TV. And then he busied himself with the daily chores, cleaning the house, doing the laundry, preparing lunch. Everything followed a precise, almost ritualistic order. While Henry vacuumed the living room, Millie looked out the window, lost in thought. There was a tranquility in the house, but also a sense of something unsaid, a silence that weighed in the air, even with the hum of the vacuum cleaner in the background. She knew her father clung to routine to avoid thinking about the emptiness that surrounded them, but as much as she wanted to change that, she didn't know how. When the day finally began to fade and the sunlight was replaced by twilight, Henry started preparing dinner. As he chopped the vegetables, he felt a strange unease in his chest, something he couldn't quite define. It was as if, for a brief moment, he sensed that something was out of place, but the feeling passed as quickly as it came. Dinner was quiet, as usual. After helping Millie get ready for bed, Henry returned to his own room. He lay down, but sleep was slow to come. He thought about Millie, about the routine they lived, and about that strange feeling he had earlier. He didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a change that would shake the foundations of his life and his perception of the daughter he thought he knew so well. The sound of rain tapping against the hospital room windows echoed through the small space. Millie, only 10 years old, lay in the bed, her large, frightened eyes fixed on the white ceiling. Her mother, Mary, sat beside her, holding her hand firmly, while Henry stood a few steps away, looking lost in a sea of conflicting emotions. It all happened so quickly. An ordinary summer afternoon had turned into a nightmare when Mary's car skidded on the slippery road and collided with a tree. The impact was devastating, and while Mary suffered only minor injuries, Millie was gravely injured, her spine compromised. The doctors were direct. Millie's chances of walking again were slim. In the days and weeks following the accident, the hospital became the family's second home. Henry, who had always been a practical and optimistic man, struggled to find some hope in the doctor's words, but reality was relentless. Millie, once an active and lively child, now faced a new reality, a reality where her movements were limited, and her independence, which had barely begun to bloom, was irrevocably altered. Mary, on the other hand, refused to lose hope. She spent days and nights by Millie's side, encouraging her, reading to her, singing her favorite songs. Mary was the family's rock, the foundation that kept everyone together, and Henry clung to her strength like a castaway in the middle of a storm. But as the years passed, the impact of the accident manifested in unexpected ways. Although Millie adapted to her new life, attending physical therapy sessions and learning to maneuver her wheelchair, Henry began to feel increasingly powerless. He watched as his wife grew weary, her energy draining as she tried to balance caring for Millie and the demands of everyday life. The shadow of exhaustion became more evident in Mary, and Henry knew something was wrong, but he didn't know how to help. Then one day, Mary went to the doctor for a routine checkup and returned with devastating news: she had cancer. The disease was already in an advanced stage, and the prognosis was grim. The news hit Henry like a direct blow to the heart. First Millie, now Mary. The life he knew was falling apart, and he didn't know how to cope with the magnitude of these losses. Mary, however, remained resilient, determined to make the most of the time she had left to care for Millie and prepare Henry for what was to come. In the months that followed, Mary became even more dedicated to Millie, while Henry watched helplessly as the cancer consumed his wife. She refused to give up, participating actively in Millie's life, helping her with homework, organizing small birthday parties to try to maintain normalcy amidst the chaos. But Mary's body was giving out, and eventually, she became too weak to continue. Shortly before her death, she called Henry for a conversation in the room they had shared since the beginning of their marriage. "Henry," she said, her voice weakened, "you need to be strong for Millie. She'll need you more than ever." Henry held her hand tightly, trying to hold back the tears. "I don't know if I can do it, Mary. Not without you." "You can," Mary insisted, her eyes fixed on his. "You've always been strong. And Millie, she's strong like you. She'll get through this, but she needs to know that you'll be there for her." Those words stayed with Henry like a promise he could never break. When Mary passed away, Henry's world collapsed, but he clung to that promise, dedicating every moment of his life to caring for Millie. He became her source of strength, her caregiver, her protector. The years following Mary's death were hard. Henry withdrew even more from the world, focusing exclusively on Millie. He learned how to care for her, administer her medication, help her dress, and assist with transfers between the bed and the wheelchair. His life became a rigid routine, a desperate attempt to keep everything under control amidst the emotional chaos he felt inside. Millie, for her part, accepted her father's protection and care, even if it meant giving up her own independence. She knew how much he needed her as much as she needed him. And so they created a quiet routine, each hiding their own pains and fears, staying united by the promise Henry made to Mary and the certainty that as long as they were together, they could face anything. In the present, as Henry remembered those difficult years, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility he carried. Caring for Millie had become his reason for living, but there was a growing unease within him, a feeling that something was about to change. He didn't know what the future held, but a part of him, the part still deeply connected to Mary, felt that he was on the brink of a revelation that would change everything. In recent months, Henry had started noticing small details around the house that left him uneasy. Nothing seemed blatantly out of place, but they were small things, things he thought only his attentive mind could perceive. At first, he tried to dismiss his suspicions, convincing himself it was just fatigue or old age playing tricks on him. However, these small anomalies became more frequent, and he could no longer ignore the feeling that something was wrong. One morning, Henry woke up early, as usual, and headed to Millie's room to help her start the day. He carefully opened the door, as he did every morning, and found Millie still asleep. But something immediately caught his attention. Millie's wheelchair was out of place. Instead of being by the bed, where he always left it for her to reach, the chair was on the other side of the room, completely out of reach for someone who couldn't walk. "Millie, dear, wake up," Henry said, his voice gentle but tinged with concern. He approached the bed and lightly shook her shoulder. Millie opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the morning light. "Good morning, Dad," she murmured, trying to shake off the sleep. "Good morning, my love," Henry replied, forcing a smile. I just wanted to ask you about your wheelchair. It's out of place. Do you know what happened?" Millie looked over at where the chair was, and for a brief moment, Henry noticed an expression of surprise, and perhaps something more, cross her face. But she quickly composed herself. "Oh, I must have bumped into it during the night," she said, her voice a bit shaky. "You know, sometimes I move around a lot in my sleep." Henry nodded, but something in Millie's response deeply unsettled him. She seemed nervous, as if she wasn't telling the whole truth. He decided not to press her at that moment, but the doubt settled in his chest like a stone. Days later, while Henry was cleaning the house, something strange happened again. He was in the bathroom, wiping the floor, when he noticed that some objects were out of place. Millie's hairbrush was on the floor, and the towel he had left hanging was tossed on the edge of the bathtub. Even stranger was what he saw on the floor, a small footprint, as if someone had walked barefoot through the bathroom. Henry looked at his own foot, covered by a slipper, and frowned. That didn't make sense. He was always in slippers at home, and Millie, well, Millie. He felt a shiver run down his spine. The mark was recent, and he knew it couldn't be his. He grabbed the cleaning cloth and scrubbed the floor, erasing the footprint, but the image stayed in his mind. He tried to push the thought away that something very strange was happening, but each day it became harder to do so. A few days later, Henry had yet another confirmation that his suspicions were not unfounded. During one of the mornings when he was helping Millie get dressed, he noticed that her foot was dirty, as if she had walked barefoot around the house. It was just a bit of dust, almost imperceptible, but for Henry, it was enough to make his suspicion grow even more. He watched her closely, waiting for some reaction, but Millie didn't seem to notice his thorough inspection. Henry tried to continue with his routine as if nothing was wrong, but he couldn't ignore the signs. Each day, his distrust grew, along with the fear that he was losing control over reality. He found himself wondering if he was becoming paranoid, if he was seeing things where there was nothing to see. But a part of him, the part that was relentlessly logical, knew he had to get to the bottom of it. He needed to know if he was truly going crazy or if something much more serious was happening. That night, Henry sat in the living room, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall as his thoughts spiraled. He knew he needed to do something about it, but he didn't want to believe that Millie could be hiding something from him. The mere thought that his daughter, the person he had dedicated his life to caring for, could be involved in some kind of deceit deeply disturbed him. But the doubt that consumed him, needed to be resolved. And as the silence of the night enveloped him, Henry made a decision. He would do whatever it took to uncover the truth, no matter what it meant for him or his relationship with his daughter. The morning began like any other. Henry was preparing breakfast for Millie while she got ready to leave. Today was therapy day, a routine that had been repeated for years. Millie's therapist was a kind, middle-aged woman who had become something of a confidant for Millie over the years. Henry had always found some comfort in knowing that his daughter was in good hands, but now, with all the doubts tormenting him, even that seemed uncertain. "Millie, are you sure you don't want me to take you today?" Henry asked, trying to sound casual as he placed a plate of toast on the table. Millie, who was adjusting her coat in her wheelchair, smiled at her father. "It's okay, Dad. The clinic's transport is coming to pick me up. I'll be back before lunch." Henry nodded, watching as she finished getting ready. He tried to push aside the growing guilt in his chest, knowing what he was about to do as soon as Millie left. He said goodbye to her at the door, watching as the adapted van took her away. As soon as the van turned the corner, Henry hurried into action. He had planned everything carefully. In the previous days, he had researched security companies that offered quick and discreet installations. Today was the day he would put his plan into action. Shortly after Millie left, a security company van arrived. Henry, with disguised nervousness, greeted the team and explained where he wanted the cameras installed: in Millie's room, the living room, the hallway, and some other strategic points around the house. While the team worked, Henry couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal growing inside him. He was violating the privacy of his own daughter, to whom he had always promised to protect and care for. But the doubts that plagued him were too strong to ignore, and he needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. In a few hours, the cameras were installed and functioning. Henry thanked the team and made sure everything was set up correctly. The house looked the same as always, but Henry knew it now held an even bigger secret, a secret he was about to uncover. When Millie returned from therapy, Henry acted naturally. He helped her settle in the living room and served lunch, as he always did. As they chatted about trivial things, Henry couldn't help but wonder what he was about to discover. Millie seemed the same as always, smiling, calm, involved in the routine they had created together. But Henry's distrust was already deeply rooted, and he knew that only the truth could free him from that suffocating uncertainty. In the days that followed, Henry kept to his normal routine but found himself increasingly torn between guilt and curiosity. He knew he needed to review the footage, but he also feared what he might find. What if he was wrong? What if, somehow, he was just imagining things? The idea that he might be mistrusting Millie without reason tormented him. Finally, a few days later, when Millie left for another therapy session, Henry decided it was time to face the truth. Sitting in the living room, he connected the camera system to the monitor and began reviewing the footage from the past few days. His hands trembled slightly as he navigated the video files, each click of the mouse echoing like a drum in his mind. At first, everything seemed normal. Millie followed her usual routine. She moved around the house in her wheelchair, read books, watched television. Henry began to doubt himself, feeling the weight of guilt increase. Perhaps he was getting old and paranoid, imagining things where there was nothing. But then he fast-forwarded to the recordings made during the night. In the video, Millie was lying in bed, apparently asleep. Henry was about to turn off the monitor, resigned to the idea that his suspicion was unfounded, when something on the screen caught his attention. Millie moved. She began to slowly get out of bed, her hands gripping the mattress firmly. Henry felt the air leave his lungs as he watched in disbelief as his daughter stood up. She took a few careful steps, moving with difficulty but with determination. Each step felt like a blow to his heart as the mystery unfolded before his eyes. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Millie, the daughter he had cared for all these years, whom he believed to be incapable of walking, was walking, even if with difficulty. Henry felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, betrayal, confusion, overwhelm him. Why was she hiding this? Why had she never told him the truth? He continued to watch, unable to look away, as Millie walked around the room, picking up a few objects, and then slowly returned to the bed. As soon as she lay down, she pulled the covers over herself as if nothing had happened, as if the secret was safe. Henry turned off the monitor, his heart pounding. He had found the answer to his doubts, but it brought more questions than he had ever imagined. What was going on? Why would Millie deceive him so cruelly? And most importantly, what would he do next? Henry spent the rest of the day in a state of silent unease, his heart heavy with the mix of emotions that swirled inside him. He knew he needed to confront Millie, but the idea of doing so filled him with pain and fear. As much as he wanted answers, he feared what those answers might mean for their relationship, a relationship he had dedicated his life to protecting and nurturing. When Millie returned from therapy that afternoon, Henry was waiting for her in the living room. He helped her inside, as he always did, but this time there was a tension in the air, a palpable electricity that Millie seemed to notice immediately. "Dad, is everything okay?" Millie asked, her voice laced with concern as she noticed the serious expression on Henry's face. Henry swallowed hard, trying to control the avalanche of emotions threatening to spill over. "Millie, we need to talk," he said, gesturing to the sofa. "Please, sit down." Millie obeyed, moving her wheelchair closer to the sofa and transferring to it with Henry's help. He sat down beside her, but for a moment, the words failed him. How could he begin? How could he confront his own daughter with what he had discovered without breaking something fundamental between them? "Millie, I need you to tell me the truth," he began, his voice low but firm. "About what's happening here at home, with me, with you." Millie frowned, confusion evident on her face. "What do you mean, Dad? What's happening?" Henry took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. He stood up slowly and went to the shelf where he had hidden the monitor that connected to the cameras. Millie watched him closely, her eyes following his every move, the tension in the air growing with each passing second. "I did something I shouldn't have done," Henry said, returning to the sofa with the monitor in his hands. "I installed cameras in the house, because I was worried because I felt something was wrong." He placed the monitor on the coffee table where they could both see it. "And I found something I need you to explain to me." Millie looked at the monitor and then at her father, her eyes wide with surprise and then with something Henry recognized as fear. "Cameras? Dad, why would you do that?" Henry avoided her gaze, feeling terribly guilty, but he knew he couldn't let himself be weakened now. He turned on the monitor and began to play the video he had watched the previous night, the video that showed Millie getting out of bed and walking, albeit with difficulty, around the room. The silence that followed was crushing. Millie watched the images, her face pale, her lips trembling. When the video ended, Henry finally found the courage to look her in the eyes. "Millie, why did you hide this from me? Why didn't you tell me you were walking? That you didn't need the wheelchair all the time?" Millie seemed to struggle to find words, her breathing quickening, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to speak several times, but the words seemed unwilling to come out. Finally, with visible effort, she managed to say, "Dad. I did it because I was scared." Henry frowned, not understanding. "Scared of what, Millie? Why would you feel the need to hide something like this from me?" Millie looked away, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Scared of losing you," she whispered. "Scared that if you knew I was regaining movement, you wouldn't need me anymore." Her words hit Henry like an avalanche, leaving him momentarily breathless. "What are you saying, Millie? How could you think I wouldn't need you?" Millie looked at her father, her expression now a mixture of sadness and despair. "After Mom died, you became everything to me, and I thought that becoming everything to you was the only way to keep you around, to make sure you didn't feel alone, that you had a reason to keep going." Henry shook his head in disbelief. "You thought that, if I knew you were recovering, I would distance myself? That I wouldn't love you, care for you anymore?" "I know it's irrational, Dad," Millie said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "But I saw how much you needed me, needed my care, and as much as I wanted to walk again, I was also scared. Scared of losing the only bond one had left with you." Henry felt tears welling up in his own eyes. He leaned forward, holding Millie's hands tightly. "Millie, I would never stop needing you. You are my daughter, my world, my reason for living, but that doesn't mean I want you to suffer or stay trapped in this life. I want you to be happy, to live fully, to do everything you desire." Millie sobbed, lowering her head. I know I was wrong, Dad. I was so scared, so confused. I didn't want you to be alone. I didn't want to lose you." Henry pulled her into a hug, feeling her fragile body tremble against his. "You will never lose me, Millie. I'll always be here, always, but you need to let me help you live, to move forward." Millie nodded, still with tears in her eyes, but also with a glimmer of hope that Henry hadn't seen in a long time. "I promise, Dad. I promise I'll never hide anything from you again." Henry smiled, a smile that was a mixture of relief and pain. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but at least the dream he and Mary had of their daughter walking again had finally come true. Henry and Millie arrived at the therapist's office on a cold but clear morning. The silence on the way there reflected the mix of emotions they both had felt since the revelation that had changed their lives. As they entered the office, they were greeted by the therapist with a warm smile, who tried to ease the palpable tension between father and daughter. They settled into the soft seats, and the session began. Millie, still a little hesitant, held Henry's hand for a moment before letting go, as if trying to find strength in that gesture. The therapist observed with a compassionate look, aware of the delicate healing process they were about to face. The session focused on explaining what had happened with Millie. Having become dependent on others' care since she was 10 years old, Millie had never developed the emotional maturity that someone her age should have. When, almost miraculously, her medications began to take effect, and she started to regain some of her movement, fear and insecurity took hold of her. Millie didn't know how to react to this new and unexpected situation. So, she hid her recovery, fearing that revealing her new condition might sever the bond that kept her so close to her father. Now, with the secret revealed, the therapeutic approach needed to change. Millie was starting a recovery path that went beyond the physical. It was also a journey of emotional growth. The focus now would be on her independence, both physically and psychologically. Millie's activities were reshaped. Intensive physical therapy became an essential part of her routine, aiming to strengthen her leg muscles and eventually allow her to walk without the aid of walkers. Additionally, the therapy sessions began to address the traumas of both Millie and Henry, so they could rebuild the shaken trust and develop a healthier, more balanced relationship. Millie also resumed her studies, both academic and technical, with the goal of catching up on lost time and preparing for a more independent life. It was a gradual process, but each new learning experience, each small progress, represented a step toward the autonomy she so desired but also feared. For Henry, the challenge was to learn to give Millie space so she could grow and develop on her own. He needed to accept that his daughter was finally ready to embrace the adult life that had long been denied to her, and that his role now was different, not that of an absolute protector but of a support, someone who loved her unconditionally and was willing to see her flourish. The family therapy sessions helped both of them face these new challenges, offering a safe space where they could express their fears, expectations, and hopes for the future. It was hard work, but slowly, father and daughter began to rebuild their relationship based on a new mutual understanding. Years passed since the day Henry discovered Millie's secret. Life since then took an unexpected turn, but at the same time, it was full of renewal. Millie, now a mature and independent woman, completed her studies and secured a stable job where she excelled due to her talent and dedication. She had transformed from a frightened and insecure young woman into a confident and capable adult. The house where Millie and Henry once lived, marked by a routine of dependence, was now a place of serenity and balance. Henry, growing older, began to face the natural challenges of old age. His health was no longer the same, and the tasks he once performed with ease now required effort. But to his joy and relief, Millie was by his side, caring for him with the same love and dedication he had shown her for so many years. On a peaceful afternoon, Millie reflected on everything that had happened. Sitting beside her father, who was resting in his favorite armchair, she recalled the mistakes she had made by hiding her recovery. Now, with the wisdom she had gained over the years, she knew that acting that way had been a great mistake motivated by fear and insecurity. If she had the chance to go back in time, she would do things differently. If her father were in the health conditions she had faced and she didn't have to work, she would make his care her top priority, without hiding anything, trusting in the love and strength of the relationship they had always shared. Henry, for his part, felt deeply grateful for the miracle of Millie's recovery. He knew his remaining years were limited, but he had found peace in his heart. He lived his days in tranquility, comforted by the fact that his daughter was safe, capable, and ready to face the future. He could finally rest, knowing that he had fulfilled his mission and that Millie would have a full and happy life, even after his departure. The two remained there in silence, enjoying each other's company. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange as a gentle breeze passed through the open windows. It was a moment of peace, acceptance, and a love that had overcome all obstacles. Millie looked at her father and smiled. She knew that despite all the challenges, they had found a new beginning together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out our next story.